Males have a dominant hierarchy, and there's a relatively small number of relatively successful males. And those successful males have preferential access to female reproductive capacity, either because the females actively choose the more dominant males, which is very common, or because the more dominant males chase all the less dominant males away. Even if the females don't exercise choice, which they often do, then the only males left around that can serve as reasonable mating partners are the more powerful ones. And so you think you get two radical determiners of evolution as a consequence of that. One is that the males are selected for their ability to move up dominance anarchy, because the ones that are at the top of the dominance hierarchy reproduce preferentially. And so that means the male dominance hierarchy, a method of selection. But then allied with that is the female proclivity for choice on whatever dimension the dominance hierarchy happens to be arranged. And so then female sexual selection also becomes a radical, non-random selector of what genetic material is going to move into the next generation. And so, I fail to see how any of that can be separated from the emergence of complex nervous systems and mind over the course of because creatures aren't making random choices. They're not random at all. Imagine a peacock's tail and it's covered with eyes, which is quite interesting because yes, of course, attracts attention and lots of animals have evolved eye-like markings. So there's the moths that when they unfold their wings, they have two big eyes on the back of them, and that's to keep birds from eating them cause the birds don't like being stared at. So they stay away from the moths. So a peacock's tail is nothing but eyes, and so it's very attractive and it's a shim. There's something about it that's beautiful, which is quite interesting too. The females have been selecting male peacocks for beauty. They have this insane tail. So the evolutionary biologists have thought, well, what possible utility could that tail be? Is it just, maybe the females got fixated on the tail, so to speak, and you got a Baldwin effect loop going there and the male peacocks just got bigger and bigger tails, and it's just like an evolutionary dead end. It's a positive feedback list system that's gone out of control. But they have done things that like look at the symmetry and size and overall quality of the male peacock's tail as a marker for physical health. So reduced parasite load, for example. And it does turn out that the healthier male peacocks have a better tail. So what the females seem to be doing is using some marker or some set of markers as a proxy indicator. You could say reasonably that female human beings do the same thing as male human beings. And there's some of that and vice versa too. Like we evaluate each other. For example, symmetry, which is one of the elements of beauty because healthier people tend to be more symmetrical and lots of animals use symmetry. Butterflies won't mate with another butterfly if it deviates from symmetry by the tiniest amounts you can imagine. So symmetry is A. There are other markers like shoulder width to waist width is one and waist width to hip width. Males use that to evaluate females in part, so there are lots of markers of health. The data worldwide seems to indicate that women made across dominant hierarchies end up socioeconomically speaking, and on average across cultures, women go for men who are about 4 to 5 years older. It varies in the Scandinavian countries. That shrunk a little bit, but not that much. And in other cultures I would say that depends to some degree on the difficulty of establishing economic independence, because in richer countries it's easier to have enough economic independence if you're a male to be a useful participant in the process of having children. But it doesn't matter cross-culturally. It's still a cross and up where men are made to cross and down. They don't care much about socioeconomic status. Doesn't seem to be part of their selection method generally. So I think that part of that is also the ability of women to select for male health. It's something like that because it isn't that. Only that because if you're healthy and energetic, you're much more likely to be successful because it's very hard to be successful if you're ill. The competition's just too high and both genders, both sex select each other for attractiveness, both select for intelligence, both select for personality, although there are differences there in terms of what's. So I think you can derive a couple of things out of this, and this is where I think people are different from other animals. Importantly different is that. So you imagine that there's tremendous selection pressure towards the production, let's say, of men who are good at climbing the male dominance hierarchy. But the thing that's so interesting about people is that we've multiplied our dominance hierarchies. Well, if you take an animal that's got a rather static behavioral pattern, there's a single hierarchy. Elephant seals are a good example of that. So elephant seals, the males are massive. They're bigger than the females, and they have harems, roughly speaking, and use physical prowess as their marker of status essentially. You know, size is a huge part of that. They're massive. These things are enormous. And so it's just power/health, maybe aggression, something like that. It's whatever makes them more suited. for the kind of physical combat that elephant seals engage in and the degree to which power is associated with dominance. Status in those sorts of situations seems to be associated with the size differential between males and females. So the more power is an issue with regards to male competence, the larger the males are compared to the females, and the more likely the males are gonna have a harem relationship with the females. And you see that a little bit in human beings cause men are bigger than women. Overwhelmingly bigger. That's sexual dimorphism. Some men are smaller than some women. But on average men are taller, they have more upper body strength, and so forth. So there is a powerful element to the male competition. But it's not as extended as it would be among animals safe like elephant seals. So in the elephant seal, you see, maybe there's one stable set of traits that are being selected for that makes the males more likely to reproduce. But human beings were very weird creatures because we're conceptually flexible. And so what seems to have happened, males started selecting each other for due in dominant competitions for something like cognitive flexibility and conscientiousness. It's something like that. So that would be the ability to abstractly represent the world, and then the ability to operate effectively within it to represent yourself socially in a way, and then to carry through with that, because that enables people to. So it's something like that. And so that produced cortical expansion. And then women were selecting men who were good at that, and that produced cortical expansion. And then there's an arms race between women and men about intelligence. So the women kept up with intelligence as the evolutionary cycle continued. But one of the consequences of selection for cortical expansion and increased cognitive flexibility, the number of dominant harkins that human beings could produce started to multiply because there are all sorts of ways that you can be successful. You think about how many ways you can be successful in modern culture, and you can be successful in dimensions that aren't even associated with each other. So you can be successful socially. That's what an extrovert would do. You can be successful in terms of an intimate relationship. That's what an agreeable person would do. A disagreeable person would be more successful in competition. A person who's high in neuroticism would be trying to protect themselves and establish some sort of security. An open person would be looking for a flexible, creative environment. And so there's this multiplicity of ways that you can establish a dominance hierarchy and be successful in it. And if you're creative, you can come up with your damn dominance hierarchy, which is exactly what you're doing, right? You spin up a game, that's yours, and then you make the rules. And that's hard because if you make a new game with new rules, it's hard to monetize it. But you can be the best at playing that game. And so that's a huge advantage to being creative if you can pull it off. So then you think, well, what's happened among human beings is the multiplication of the set of possible dominance hierarchies. So it's become very broad. And then you could say, well, what's driving selection now is the ability to be successful across multiple sets of dominance and hierarchy.